Welcome to the Go Phish podcast. I'm Dan Thornton, and today I'm joined by Jonathan Satchell, Chief Executive of Learning Technologies Group, a global leader in digital learning and talent management. If you work in cybersecurity, you know threats are getting smarter, scams are getting sneakier, and all the tech in the world doesn't help if people keep falling for the same tricks. So that's why we are looking forward to this conversation to hear how the world of corporate learning is stepping up to tackle human risk, how organizations can drive real behavior change, and where the future of corporate training and awareness is heading. Jonathan, thanks very much for joining us today.
Pleasure, Dan. Good to see you.
For people who don't know Learning Technologies Group, what does the company do and who do you guys serve?
The clue's in the title, actually. And so we are a business that not only delivers technology to provide learning to adults in the workplace. We're not involved in the children's education world at all. We do touch universities to a certain extent, so higher education, but our predominant focus is on adults in the workplace in corporate learning around the world. We started life very much as a technology business, both creating learning content to be e-learning content to be delivered electronically, and also we then branched out into buying learning platforms, learning management systems, authoring tools, etc. And latterly, we bought a very large managed learning services business in the US, which expanded our footprint and our number of staff dramatically. So we are a combined learning technology and learning services business. 5,000 people in 36 countries, so we're substantial.
Fantastic. Diving into your career, Jonathan, what led you to starting Learning Technologies Group and get into the corporate training space? How did that kick off?
Well, those are two separate answers. I fell into learning. I was a computer salesman in the 80s and early 90s in London. And as I decided to sort of move on, I ended up, long story, no need for it, getting involved with the BBC and the Institute of Chartered Accountants for a continuing professional development video training service for accountants. Got involved in that, and that morphed into management training. I bought a management training video company in 1997 up in Manchester, sold that in 2006, and then my chairman and I bought a business called Epic, a custom e-learning content business down in Brighton in 2008. And that is the kernel of Learning Technologies Group.
Brilliant. Yeah, you've been in the space. What's been, in your opinion, the biggest shift in education and training that you've seen since you've?
If I'm allowed to be a bit more skeptical than perhaps some of my evangelistic learning colleagues would be, I think there's an element of we do the same things as we've always done. It's just that the delivery mechanism has modified and morphed and refined along the way. Maybe that's a good thing. It's consistent and clearly it's done because it's effective. I always think that one of the biggest difficulties that we have with delivering learning is the expectation gap, because I think people always go into these opportunities thinking that they can achieve perhaps or more than initially can be achieved. And I suppose over the years we've been able to close that gap quite dramatically. So that's probably the biggest change I've seen. And that's caused by a real focus on it and using technology to measure that as well. In the most basic of forms, you understand what someone knows beforehand and then assess what someone knows afterwards and see that you've genuinely closed that gap. And of course, we can use technology now to make sure that we're matching someone's learning requirements with the appropriate and learning styles with the appropriate learning delivery mechanism. These days, I think we're at the early stage, but I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but the way AI can examine what skills someone has, what skills their cohort of equivalent people have, and how to close that gap is something I think is really exciting for our industry.
The customization of training down
Adaptive
to the
learning,
individual.
personalization.
Adaptive learning, personalization at scale is a very, very exciting bit for sure.
And doing it in a cleverer way, because we have a bigger data set that's being analyzed very cleverly by AI. So it's not as I mentioned before about closing this expectation gap. We were doing it in a pretty basic way. What do you know today? What do you know before the course, and what do you need to know, and therefore what do you know afterwards? It's pretty basic, and I think we're getting much more sophisticated in that regard.
Where are you seeing most demand right now from customers? Are there specific topics driving demand, or is there specific technology they're after? where are you hearing the most noise from the market?
So I probably can start with the alternative view of that answer, which is I can tell you where demand has disappeared, and that's in DE&I, strangely enough. And we actually saw that softening within 2 years ago, but clearly Trump has had a big effect on that in the US, where we predominantly do 70% of our business. So we have seen an immense decline in DE&I training. I think that's a shame. I think there were some aspects of that were going a bit too far. So it's good that it's pulled back, but the pendulum always swings too far. So we need to see a more normalized position, which I hope we will eventually. So that's one aspect. And perhaps you weren't expecting me to say that, but that certainly is the case that we're seeing in our business. And of course, the very obvious answer is everyone is looking at how do they utilize and deliver more efficiency with AI. I'd say to you that astonishingly, we're finding most of the early adopters and those companies, large corporates, I mean, we deal with very large multinational organizations that have been brave enough to start to implement some AI, have had at best mixed results, if not disappointing results from the actual outcome of it. So it's all launched with a fanfare of delight and aren't we bleeding edge, blah, blah, blah. But they've actually found that the utility of it is much less than they expected. Yes, there are some obvious things, and we all know that the ChatGPT stories of doing a bit of analysis of what you were going to say or writing something for you and so on. I'm talking about something more meaningful than just that.
Yeah.
We are beginning to see a refinement now in the use of Gen AI in the creation of content. But where I think there's some great opportunity is using the skills of AI in terms of its ability to assimilate data from disparate sources, analyze it. We're creating lots of vectorized databases that we can really look at data in a very similar format. And if you think about very large organizations, so we've just worked with a large multinational bank, household name bank, where they said, heavens above, we've got 7,000 e-learning courses on our LMS. And we know that 6,900 of them aren't used very often, but we don't want to throw them away. There are multiple language versions. We know that some of them are not up to date with the latest regulations. We don't have common ways of describing their learning objectives, so we can't even compare them easily, compare and contrast them. And we think this is a 3-person year job to assess all of those courses and titles, note them down in a consistent manner, and then analyze them. And we took the challenge on and built an AI screening tool to do that. It's screened in a month, and then they took 3-person months to deal with the results of that and rationalize the database of courses down to about 1,000, something like that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's a really great example of a good application in the learning space of AI. And like you say, just the analysis bit and taking mundane work like that and doing that so that your learning experts, as you say, your learning experts can use their creativity and use their experience and knowledge to do sort of a lot more creative, impactful, engaging work.
Absolutely.
Than the analytical side of things. So yeah, that's a great example.
And the other thing I'd just say is our managed learning services consulting business, which is at the heart of what we do. Obviously, people are launching and using and tracking e-learning courses day in, day out, and they're very important as part of the overall delivery ecosystem. But let's not forget the human being at the heart of this, the person that is thinking up the learning strategy and implementing the various aspects of that. And we do that for very large organizations and governments all over the world. And we are really beginning to see our customers, quite rightly, more demanding of how can we insert AI into this process to take away some of the lower, if you like, the intellectually lower challenging tasks with agentic AI and so on. And again, very mixed results of early adopters and how they've implemented that. And what we're finding that's really exciting to us, and we are learning every day, every week, it just changes a little bit. And I think that's the nature of the beast. But we are really beginning to advise our clients from a consulting perspective about how to best implement that type of services-based agentic AI. And that's exciting. And you can really see the power of that multiplying exponentially over the next couple of years and making a really big difference. And it's just going to, at first, my view is people are going to lose, or meaningful numbers of people aren't going to have their jobs displaced by this. What it's going to do is just make them more efficient. I was hearing a wonderful story yesterday, not related to learning, of a person in a hospital complaints department that used to take about 25 minutes per letter to respond to a complaint letter. She now uses a well-honed AI tool that's learned her language and her style and so on. And this tool analyzes the complaint letter, poses a draft. She then spends 5 minutes editing it and making sure it's personalized. And she has become 5 times more productive. Her job isn't going away, but the pile of complaints letters finally is getting responded to.
Exactly.
And that's where you go, yeah, I like this. This is an appropriate use of AI that's making a difference.
And you can imagine that application in the bureaucracy of government agencies and departments and municipal level bureaucracy and everybody always complaining about how slow systems are and how bad processes are. Well, this could really, but people need to learn how to implement it properly and where to implement it properly and have the right sort of approach to it. Yeah, but we've seen from a content creation bit, for sure, it's no one's jobs are getting replaced, but it will always take the human eye, the human approach to make sure that something is going to be engaging. It's going to hit the right notes. It's covering the right subjects, having the right copy is not the be all and end all. It's is this really going to engage with the learner? I think AI is still a long way away from really being able to see that and test that and understand that. And then there's some of the very mundane stuff out there, like translations. Translations was, a massive job for us in the content creation side of things. That was very, very expensive to do that through agencies. And now the price point of that is coming right down. The affordability is coming right down, and that's been really exciting and definitely something that we've seen.
And the other one, which you may not quite have seen in the same way, but we're partnering with an unbelievably capable AI engine, is video production. So I mean, I had a permanently established media team within the group, and we were sending camera crew, sound crew, director out to do one-day shoots, talking heads, interviews, etc. We don't do it anymore. We write the script, we describe the characters we want to see on screen, we describe what their background should be, we tell that to an AI engine called Colossian, and it goes and produces a perfectly acceptable video. Now look, if you spend all your time going, is that person truly human and real, and you don't allow yourself to suspend your disbelief and look at the fact that they are handling a difficult conversation, say about someone's performance or whatever, and you look for the nuances of the way they do it, then you can be cynical about it. But believe you me, it has got to the sort of, it's 95% of the way there on believable quality, and therefore just watch it and enjoy the fact that you can have far more of these videos produced for a fraction of the cost, and therefore benefit from the additional learning material.
For sure.
I think that's a game changer. I really do.
And that video quality, the video experience, the talking head experience is always going to surpass the quality of text-based experience, for sure. I think that's where people are consuming their, people are living on TikTok, they're living on YouTube, they're watching podcasts. So, I mean, if that's where the content should be.
As we know, we need a mix of delivery mechanisms to make learning work for everybody's different learning style. But I agree with you, video plays a really important role within that. And I think as long as you're not trying to garner an expert opinion where you really want the real human expert to be giving you that opinion, and everything else is substandard, but where you're trying to create a mini drama and effectively demonstrate good and bad practice, you can have imaginary characters doing that. They would have been imaginary human beings doing that in a script.
Yes. So exactly.
It works. Yeah, we're I saw this tool first time about 2 years ago and it wasn't quite there, but the advances and the pace at which it's advanced is absolutely amazing. So yeah, I would certainly recommend any of your listeners to look at that Colossian.
Colossian. We'll check that out. We'll post that. With that, a lot of naysayers, a lot of people will, it's killing the industry and there's a whole industry going to get wiped out because of that. And I don't know, the same people that would have been involved in putting together those videos originally, those creatives that know about how to produce these types of things with the angles, with the timing, with the different characters, they are still needed for this, but now they can do it much quicker at a much affordable rate so that the industry actually grows because everyone can afford to play now. So your customer base expands exponentially because now it's within budget. Now everybody can do it. And you're still there's still such a small number of key creatives that can actually do this effectively to create a good piece of content. So every single business is not going to start doing it themselves. It's still going to be outsourced to media teams, but the media teams can now do it at a tenth of the price and much quicker.
And remember, an actor could only create a good piece of impactful learning if the script had been written well. And I don't think we're yet at the stage where you trust Gen AI on its own to write the script. It needs a human expert who understands all the nuance of, oh, that person just reacted in that way. How would you now handle that? You know, in this difficult conversation, I want to talk to you about your performance. You know, there's still, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see any time in the foreseeable future where the human expert is not required. Just a lot of their heavy lifting around that they used to do will be done for them by AI, and it will make them more effective and more efficient.
In the group, Jonathan, how are you guys deciding on what features, what new content, or actually at a bigger scale, what new companies you guys are looking at acquiring or partnering with? You know, where's that sort of priority coming from?
So we're at an interesting juncture. So LTG grew by acquisition between 2013 and 2021 by 17 deals. We went from 100 people to 5,000 people, from £1.5 million of profit to £100 million. You know, it was a pretty chaotic rocket ship ride. After late 2021, we have done no further acquisitions. We stated that we wouldn't in for at least a year because we bought a very big business that needed digesting, if you like. But since then, we've made a conscious decision not to. Public markets have been difficult and choppy, as you know. We were a public company, and we made the difficult but conscious decision to take the business private about 2 months ago, with the assistance of an American private equity firm called General Atlantic. So we are in a sort of a new realm, if you like, a new place of operating. And at the moment, we're again not really pursuing acquisitions. We're looking at the group. We're considering what we will do with the group of businesses that we have. Those 17 acquisitions have turned into effectively 10 operating units in the organization. We have a mix of leading edge technology, more old-fashioned technology, a lot of middle-of-the-road, you know, very solid, well-liked systems. And then we have, as I say, this international learning services business, which is very well respected. It's the market leader. So we have a really interesting mix of different capabilities. We think that's an appropriate balance and mix. You could say, well, you're missing a sort of headline AI capability. I have a bit of skepticism about that, because these headline AI capabilities weren't created by AI experts. They were created by people who learned AI, who were doing software beforehand. Sorry, but it's true. I'm actually a big believer in the fact that it's much better having someone who has a legacy software background, who is then intellectually powerful enough to go and learn the AI aspects and start from scratch and learn from their mistakes and so on. AI is moving very quickly. So if you call yourself an expert today, unless you're keeping up, you won't be an expert in 2 months' time. So we've taken the view that we can home grow a lot of our AI capability rather than go out and pay some ridiculous price for it. And we're getting a lot of feedback about that. I mean, our homegrown AI consulting capability is really interesting, and this is real world experience. We've worked with some of the world's largest companies, including a very leading household name in technology, who basically has forgotten more about AI than we'll ever know. And we have helped them to real world implement AI in their learning faculty better than they could do themselves. They came to us and said, we're not getting the output that we expected from this. Can you come and help us understand why? And we said, well, we're not truly AI expert, but if you can work with us from your perspective, we'll give you a real world interpretation. And we learned lots together, and we're now providing that type of capability to many of our customers. So those are the things we're seeing.
That's really exciting. So I mean, it's been a hell of a journey of growth for yourself and for the group. What would you say has been the hardest part of growing so far?
Look, there are so many things that you can't ignore that you start as a people business, and when you're making acquisitions, mostly in America, you're on the other side of the Atlantic. There are interesting challenges, cultural challenges. I've always been very mindful of how a British company goes about working alongside American partners, as I would call them, and you have to handle that in a very sensitive way. There are the inevitable challenges of just group size and scale and complexity. You end up not making the step changes in system at exactly the right time that you should have done. Those are always quite interesting situations. Being public was a blessing for our first 8 years of life, but actually since 2021, it was was a pretty tedious and turgid place to be. Markets have not been supportive to any company, particularly buy and build growth companies like us. So that was a distraction that became an unwelcome distraction, and I don't miss one iota of it now that we're, just nearly 2 months not being public, and I had no idea just how much of a time distraction it was until I wasn't doing it anymore. And then you go, goodness me, I've got time back in abundance. So that's been quite fun. I think at the end of the day, it's all about trying to make sure there's an ever expanding number of people have a good feel for the mission and what you're trying to achieve. And that's not easy, particularly when you're based in 36 different countries, lots of language, English is not everyone's first language. You have to be really mindful about how you communicate. And I'd say that's probably one of the strongest lessons I've learned from a broad brush approach.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Before we started recording, you spoke about you spending a lot of time working remotely from home. Is that your normal sort of default setting? Is your team quite distributed? Is remote working something that you have got across the different companies? What's your approach with the group and remote working?
So we were very much office based. COVID arrived, and I suppose we rather found that we were pretty effective when we forcibly transitioned to home working in March 2020. And I was really pleasantly surprised. I mean, I probably slightly don't remember it properly now, but it wasn't as bad as I expected. I then expected productivity to fall backwards, and it didn't. So we started, as we sort of became more used to home remote working, we started to think about whether that was a mode that we could pursue. And our first step into a more permanent nature of that was to say, we are willing to employ new people who are not close to an office location. Sometime mid 2020, we started doing that. And if you think of that, effectively the die is cast at that point. And so we then shortly after that communicated to people that we were willing to consider ourselves a remote working location going forward. And we started to consider that in terms of our real estate footprint as well. So, I mean, I've been, as leases have come up for renewal, I've been closing offices like you wouldn't believe. So we're now 5 years on from effectively the forcible beginning of that experiment. It is different now. I think we are at times disadvantaged in the way that we induct new people. I think that being close to each other in an office environment, picking up things by osmosis is something we miss, and we're looking at ways of dealing with that. I don't like what I read in the media. It seems like a very noisy topic at the moment, which is the whole polygamy of work. I've got 2, 3, 4 jobs, whatever. I think that's a tiny minority of our people, and I'm sad if they're doing that because it doesn't feel particularly honest or honourable to me. But that's not going to cause us to all of a sudden knee jerk and say, right, we're forcing everyone back into some offices around the world. We're going to deal with that problem at source, not to affect everybody else. We are seeing some productivity questions in various different either locations or functions, which we again are going to deal with on a localized basis. But in general, it's worked well. I'm a personal advocate for it. So I don't live in the UK anymore, although I am in our office in London today. I think there are a lot of benefits if you have the self-discipline to work remotely. And I certainly am a lot more darn efficient than I am when I'm in the office, but I like being in the office to see people. There is no perfect balance here. There is no perfect answer. You end up with if you end up in the binary situation of all office or all remote, which we sort of are at the all remote end, it's not perfect. And I also don't think thou shalt come into the office 3 days a week or else is the right answer either.
Yeah, your point about the onboarding is really key, and it's something that I've experienced with our small business. We're fully remote working, and yeah, it's never really sort of thought about. I'm such a supporter of remote working, but the onboarding bit is tough. Without that, bringing somebody completely new into your organization, trying to embed them in your culture and the way that you do things and the way that you are is very challenging when you're fully remote. And it wasn't actually something that I'd thought about before. And something that I've definitely, from a creative point of view, and yourselves, you're a completely creative company, creating content, creating training. Do your creative minds find it a little bit more difficult to collaborate, or have they built processes and built ways around that? Having two creatives side by side, throwing ideas around a table has always been sort of the 5-star option. And
Sure.
yes, there are many tools now that can try and replicate that. but it's never the same. And I kind of find with the creative element of it, with the design side of things, it's one thing I find missing, for sure.
So I think the ability to collaboratively be creative, brainstorming with each other, I think is definitely impaired by not being in the office together, although you can use these whiteboarding platforms and the rest of it. So we do encourage those situations to be caused to happen, and it doesn't have to be an office. They can meet in a coffee shop somewhere or whatever. But I think we've modified our processes so you end up with a bit more of a stage gated situation where someone applies their creative skills and then passes it on. And although it's not brainstorming in the room at the same time, you still get the benefit of lots of different people's perspectives and input. And frankly, good old fashioned, as long as you've got good behaviors for conference calls, and a good way of chairing them and supporting them, then we find actually that people can be quite creative and debate their perspectives in that sort of environment. There are a number of different ways of approaching it. Again, I'd say to you, imperfect but good enough.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
you get lots of benefits the other way of people not taking a lot of time traveling to a place and so on. So I mean, there is always a mixed argument to all of this, which is never binary.
For sure. And like you said, there's a hell of a lot of noise about it right now. A lot of the big tech companies are pulling people back in, and the media are jumping on it. And
I don't buy it personally. When I'm in, I work out how much less productive I am. I am less productive in an office, no question.
Yeah, for sure. Jonathan, before we wrap up, can you let our listeners know how they can learn more about Learning Technologies Group and how they can connect with you online?
Sure. So the website about the business is not super exciting. It's a holding company website effectively, but within that you can click through to any of our operating businesses, which are far more exciting and interesting. So that's ltgplc.com, and I'm available on LinkedIn, and my email address, very happily would say it, is jsatchell, so JSATCHELL at ltgplc.com. So if anyone has anything they'd like to talk to me about, I always happily receive them in my inbox.
That's amazing. Thanks so much. Well, that's it for today's episode of Go Phish. Massive thanks to Jonathan for sharing those insights. It's been great to get the raw, unfiltered view from somebody in the thick of it. Thanks again for listening, everyone. And if you found this valuable, drop us a follow and feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Catch you guys next time. Cheers.